When seeing this green metal giant, the whole world immediately thinks of the glow of New York and of the dream of having a much better life for everyone. But is this a story of selfless kindness, or does it have a dark history behind it? Does it truly represent the kind of freedom that we all imagine? The truth is that its light was born of a political conspiracy in the shadows of Paris, and it was about to end up at the bottom of the sea due to a lack of money. It was a financial disaster. Let's get to know the story of liberty enlightening the world, the monument that wasn't an official government gift, but rather the obsessive dream of a man who challenged engineering laws to prove that an idea can be stronger than steel. Today we see it as a welcome icon, but its true mission was a secret message sent from France to an America that had just emerged from its own internal carnage. In this story, we will explain the reason for every single inch of its metal skin. Everything began at a dinner in Versailles, that French city of immense palaces and gardens that seemed to have no end, in the year 1865. The air in the dining room was heavy, thick with the aroma of imported cigars and the steam of the red wine that filled up the crystal glasses. Edouard de la Boulaye, a quick-minded politician and defender of the people's right to choose their own rulers, raised his glass with a very slow and deliberate gesture. It was not just any dinner among friends. It was a gathering of minds who hated oppression. France lived then under the rigid rule of Napoleon III, and Edouard de la Boulaye felt his country was suffocating. "Look at the United States," said Edouard de la Boulaye, while the other guests remained in total silence. "They have just finished a terrible civil war. They have ended slavery and are still standing. We should give them a monument, something that celebrates their very own freedom, but that also reminds our own people here in France of exactly what we are missing." Among the invited guests was a young sculptor by the name of Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi. Upon hearing those words, his eyes shone with an intensity that was almost feverish. Frédéric Auguste Bartholdi was not an artist of small figures to be placed on top of a mantle. He was a man who truly dreamed of something much bigger. "A colossus, something that touches the clouds," he murmured softly to himself. At that moment, the idea was not a gift of friendship, but a political Trojan horse. They wanted to build a symbol of democracy so big that the French emperor could not forbid it without appearing like a tyrant to the entire world. Bartholdi did not waste any time at all after that dinner. Years before this dinner, he had already tried to raise a giant statue elsewhere. He had traveled to Egypt, crossing the sand dunes under a sun that burned the skin, what people used to call a truly scorching and burning sun. There he saw the Great Pyramids and the ancient stone sphinxes, those stone figures with a lion's body that seemed to watch over time itself. He became obsessed with the idea of creating a giant Egyptian woman who would hold a lamp at the entrance to the Suez Canal, the water passage that connects the Mediterranean Sea with the Red Sea. He named that ambitious project Egypt Carrying the Light to Asia. He presented his drawings to the ruler of Egypt, hoping he would be amazed. But the response he received was a firm and absolute no. "It is too expensive, Bartholdi. It is a madness impossible to pay for," they told him. The sculptor returned to France with a completely broken and heavy heart, but with the plans for his giant woman tucked tightly under his arm. When La Boulaye spoke at that famous dinner in the city of Versailles, Bartholdi suddenly saw his second chance and his new great opportunity. He simply replaced the Egyptian tunic with a classical and noble Roman tunic and transformed the desert peasant woman into the majestic goddess of liberty. In his workshop in Paris, Bartholdi began to carefully mold the clay. But what kind of face do you put on a symbol like liberty? It could not be a happy face or a playful one at all. It had to be the face of someone who has seen much and remains unbowed. Historians tell that Bartholdi looked at the most severe and constant person in his life, his mother, Charlotte. If you look closely at the face of the statue, you see no softness there. You see a square jaw, a wide forehead, and sunken cheekbones that give an air of absolute authority. Her eyelids are heavy, and her gaze is piercing, directed fixedly toward the distant horizon, as if she were watching so that no one crosses the ocean to bring back tyranny. It is not an ornament, it is a warning. Bartholdi shouted to his many assistants when they were trying to soften and smooth out the lines of the giant nose. Every inch of that face was designed to command respect from kilometers away. But there was a problem that kept the engineers awake at night. A statue of that size, made of copper sheets the thickness of a 2-cent coin, would collapse at the first gust of wind in the New York harbor. Bartholdi knew about art, but not about how to prevent the metal from bending like paper. The first engineer in charge, a man named Viollet-le-Duc, died suddenly, leaving the project in the air. That was when Gustave Eiffel entered the scene, long before his famous tower was even a drawing. Eiffel was a man who understood iron as if it were part of his own body. "Let's not make it rigid," Eiffel proposed, to everyone's total surprise. His idea was truly revolutionary for the end of the 1800s. Instead of filling the statue with sand or stones, he designed a flexible iron skeleton, an internal tower that functioned exactly like a human spine. This system allowed the copper skin to hang from the structure, joined by iron bands that could stretch and shrink accordingly. Thanks to Eiffel's genius, liberty is not just a static mass. It is a being that breathes. When strong winds hit the bay, the statue can sway up to 8 centimeters, and its arm up to 15 centimeters, without a single rivet ever breaking. It was, in essence, the world's first skyscraper, but disguised as a woman. The place where the statue was built, the Gage, Gauthier & Company workshop in Paris, became a spectacle that no one wanted to miss. The smell of hot metal and the constant sound of hammers hitting the copper filled the nearby streets. The workers used a craftsmanship technique called repoussé. This is a case of repoussé, a traditional metalworking technique, as you know, that artisanal technique that consists of shaping the copper sheets, hitting them with wooden hammers from the backside against giant plaster molds, until the metal takes the exact shape of the muscle or robe that Bartholdi had designed. It was a job of incredible precision that required great skill. If they hit too hard, the copper would break into pieces. If they hit too softly, the shape did not remain clear. The citizens of Paris walked around and saw absolutely absurd things. One day, a giant hand holding a massive stone-like tablet, that specific tablet of laws she carries in her left arm, appeared peeking over the high fences of the Parisian workshop. Another day, it was a metal knee that blocked the way. People paid for tickets to enter the busy workshop and walk among the giant toes of the statue, which were larger than a full-grown adult man. "We look like ants building a goddess," the visitors said while taking photos next to the copper nails. Money continued to be the great and terrible enemy. Laboulaye and Bartholdi realized that without showing something real, donations would simply stop. So they made a desperate decision to save their dream. They would finish the right arm first, the one holding the torch, and send it to the United States for a great fair in Philadelphia in 1876. It was one of the strangest visions in all of history. In the middle of a park filled with people in their best clothes, a golden metal arm 12 meters high emerged from the ground. For a few cents, people could climb an internal ladder to the torch platform. From up there, the Americans looked out over the vast landscape, astonished by the scale of what was coming their way soon. "It is immense! It is glorious!" the children shouted as they came back down to the ground. But while the arm triumphed in the city of Philadelphia, in the Paris workshop, the rest of the body remained a puzzle of loose pieces. The American government refused to pay for the pedestal where the statue should stand, arguing that they had not asked for any such gift. Bartholdi was absolutely furious about the lack of support. He had invested his entire life and money into this project, and now he found himself with an arm in America and a head in France, but nowhere at all to actually join them together. Liberty was, literally, torn apart by the politicians' complete and total lack of generosity. As the statue grew in the courtyard of the Parisian workshop, surpassing even the height of the 6-story buildings nearby, the world began to understand that this was not just a mere sculpture. It was a challenge to the laws of physics and to human patience. Eiffel checked every rivet, knowing that the sea salt would try to devour the iron. Bartholdi watched over every single fold of the copper robe, making sure it looked like fabric moved by the wind and not cold metal. Part 1 of this story ends here, with the statue completely assembled in the city of Paris, dominating the city's skyline like a brilliant and glowing copper apparition. Because then it was not green, but the color of a brand new chocolate coin. But the most dangerous journey of all was about to begin for everyone. A journey that would cross a truly enraged and violent ocean, and would face liberty against the poverty and contempt of those it was meant to protect. The statue was completely finished in Paris, but on American soil, the project was a corpse that no one wanted to bury. In the year 1885, the base where the giant should stand was just a hole full of mud and broken promises on the desolate Bedloes Island. The committee in charge of raising funds in New York had run out of a single cent. The city's millionaires, those living in marble mansions, mocked the French gift. If the French want to send it, let them pay for the support themselves, they said in private clubs while smoking expensive cigars. The situation was so desperate that other cities like Boston or Philadelphia began sending messages to Paris. If New York does not want it, we will build the pedestal ourselves. It was then that Joseph Pulitzer, a man who knew well what poverty meant, because he himself had arrived in America with tattered clothes and without speaking the language, decided to use his newspaper, The World, to teach the powerful a lesson. Pulitzer knew that freedom was not a luxury for just a few people, but the only hope for those who have absolutely nothing at all. In March 1885, he launched a campaign that would change the history of communication. He did not ask for large checks from the big banks. He asked for his money from the common and ordinary people. Pulitzer wrote with a rage that truly burned on the paper. The statue is not a gift from the French millionaires to the American millionaires, but rather a gift from the entire French people to the entire American people. He promised that he would print the name of every donor on the front page of his newspaper, regardless of whether they gave a single dollar or just 1 cent. The response was a massive explosion of popular pride. A boy named Tommy sent 5 cents that he had earned by cleaning out stables. A woman sent $1 that was everything she had to buy food for that week. In just 5 months, Pulitzer managed to raise the missing $100,000. More than 120,000 people donated to the cause, and most of them were immigrants who still did not speak English well, but who understood perfectly well what that torch really represented for them. Meanwhile, in the port of Rouen, France, Liberty was being carefully disassembled. It was a painful and difficult process to witness for the creators. The workers, who had spent years hammering the copper into shape, now had to separate the arms, head, and torso from Gustave Eiffel's iron skeleton. Each of the 350 pieces was protected with straw and wood in massive crates. The ship in charge of transporting it, the war frigate Isère, was too small for such a cargo. When the crates were finally lowered into the dark hold of the ship sank so low in the water that many thought it would sink before leaving port. "We are carrying the soul of France in wooden crates. If the sea wants her, we will go down with her," the sailors said as they tightened the heavy ropes for the long journey. The journey across the Atlantic Ocean was like a descent into hell. For 27 days, the Isère was hit by storms that seemed to want to devour the metal. The crates, weighing tons, moved in the hold with a sound like thunder. If just one of those crates had broken loose from its ropes, it would have gone through the ship's hull as if it were made of paper, sending the Statue of Liberty to the bottom of the sea forever. The men worked in the darkness, surrounded by salt water leaking everywhere, securing every single screw. "The ship is tilting. We are going to capsize," they shouted during the night of June 15th, when a giant wave almost knocked over the frigate. But the frigate Isère successfully resisted the storm and managed to stay afloat. When the ship finally entered New York Harbor, after its long and dangerous journey, the spectacle was something that the witnesses remembered until the very day they died. Thousands of boats of all sizes, from small rowboats to massive steamships, filled the bay, went out to receive the giant goddess that was arriving inside wooden crates. But the joy of Bartholdi, who was traveling on a nearby boat at that moment, turned into frustration when he saw that the pedestal was still not completely finished. Richard Morris Hunt, the architect of the base, was a man of great vision, was using a material that at the time was new and suspicious: concrete. It was the largest concrete structure ever built up until that specific moment, and the workers had to pour it layer by layer with great patience and care, waiting for it to dry under the burning sun and the sudden bay rains. The final assembly was a dance of death at 60 meters in height. There were no safety nets, no plastic helmets, and no laws to protect workers. The skywalkers of the 1800s, as the men who worked at great heights were called, had to climb all over Eiffel's iron skeleton to reach the summit, while the wind blew with a force that made the entire structure sway dangerously. "You must hold that rivet. Do not ever look down at the abyss." The noise of the pneumatic hammers against the copper was so loud and intense that many of the workers lost their hearing forever because of it. They had to fit the copper sheets, which were as thin as 2 coins together, over the iron frame, making sure each piece fit perfectly with the previous one. Bartholdi watched over every detail from the ground using a telescope. He was truly obsessed with the 7 rays of the majestic crown. Each ray measures almost 3 meters long and represents the 7 seas and continents. It was his way of saying that freedom knows no boundaries or borders. There was also the tablet that the statue holds in her left hand. On it, Bartholdi had the date of American independence engraved in Roman numerals: July 4th, 1776. He wanted the monument to be a history book written in metal. But there is a detail that Bartholdi purposely hid and that almost no one sees. If you could fly over the statue and look at its feet, you would see they are not still. The right foot is raised, with the heel clearly off the ground. Liberty is not standing there waiting, she is actually walking forward. And beneath her feet, half buried by the copper robe, are some broken chains of immense iron. This is the deepest and most profound secret of the entire monument. Laboulaye and Bartholdi wanted to celebrate the end of slavery, a fact that had occurred just a few years before after the carnage of the Civil War. However, in order not to anger the politicians who still did not accept that all men are born free, the sculptor decided that the chains should be subtle and almost hidden, visible only to those who dared to look closely at the ground she treads. On October 28, 1886, the day of the inauguration, New York awoke under a thick fog, which was a place where it was almost completely impossible to enter at all. President Grover Cleveland was there, surrounded by military men in their bright and shining uniforms, and thousands of citizens who were waving flags with great enthusiasm. The first ticker tape parade in all of history was held that day. The Wall Street offices threw the rolls of paper from their adding machines out the windows, creating a white rain that covered the streets as if it were snow in mid-October. Bartholdi was all alone, hidden deep inside the head of the giant statue. He had to pull a rope so that the French flag covering the face fell to the ground. When the flag finally fell, a roar from thousands of people exploded in the harbor. The steamship sirens sounded with a desperate force, filling the entire air with thick white smoke. But there was a specific group that did not celebrate: the many women present. Back in those days, women were not allowed to vote in any elections, and they complained bitterly that a woman's figure was being used to represent a freedom that they themselves did not actually have in their real daily lives. "It is a metal hypocrisy," the protests in the various newspapers said. With the passing of the decades, the statue began to die, or so everyone thought. The original copper, which shone like a chocolate coin fresh from the box, began to tarnish. The salty bay air attacked the metal, creating a chemical reaction that scientists call patina. It is that specific change where the brown turns into a bluish green. In the early 1900s, the United States government suddenly went into a panic. They thought the statue was rotting and proposed painting it brown to regain its look. There was a massive national protest against the plan. People had fallen in love with that green color, like an ancient sea goddess's skin. Engineers discovered that green layer was a natural armor protecting the copper from moisture. The statue also had to learn to be useful. For years, it was a lighthouse. The government put electric lights in the torch, but they were too weak for the fog. Additionally, thousands of birds died every night by crashing into the glass, blinded by the glare. Finally, they decided that its only mission was to be a powerful symbol for the world. During the hungry years in Europe, when millions of people arrived on crowded ships, the first thing they saw upon waking was that green figure silhouetted against the sky. For those immigrants who arrived with tattered clothes and fear in their eyes, at last the statue was the face of a mother who welcomed them to their new home. Many of them did not know who Bartholdi was, or what Eiffel's skeleton truly meant. But seeing the torch, they knew that their long journey of poverty had finally ended. "If she is there, then we can be here," they said to themselves. The parents murmured to their children while pointing out the distant Bedloes Island. Liberty thus became known as the Mother of Exiles for all who arrived, a name given by the poet Emma Lazarus in a poem now engraved on the pedestal. The statue's story ends by reminding us it's not just a 200-ton metal object. It is the result of the stubbornness of a sculptor who simply did not accept no, of the genius of an engineer who made iron truly dance with the wind, and of the generosity of thousands of poor people who gave their cents to raise it. Liberty is still there, with her feet walking toward the future, and her broken chains, reminding us that light, to truly shine, must be paid for by all of us.